We live in a world that's saturated with archetypes. We've got personality types, spiritual types, political types. Think about the reformer and the rebel and the traditionalist and the idealist, on and on. We name them, we sort ourselves into them, and once we're in them, we can defend them. And I've been noticing this a lot lately. Political conflict doesn't persist because people misunderstand democracy. I think most of us know the rules, and we value fairness and liberty and accountability. And the trouble is when these conflicts occur because principles don't operate in a vacuum. They run into something deeper, into a part of ourselves that we rarely examine. And Jung labeled that part the shadow. And that's the part that we disown in ourselves. And it deals with what we don't want to see. And often it is aggression and envy. Sometimes it's shame, fear, and hypocrisy. And when those parts stay unacknowledged, they don't disappear, but they get projected. And not just onto an individual, but we can project onto entire groups of people. And this is how a shadow becomes collective, and once that happens, it stops being personal discomfort and it becomes an identity and moral and our actions and beliefs become justified. And from this angle, modern political dysfunction is no longer just about broken systems. It could be about these mass projections, and I feel like I'm noticing them. And it's a widespread refusal to face what's within us. And we move into asymmetry traps, and we tend to believe that we apply our values fairly. But consider this. When we say everyone should follow the rules, except when they don't, we're not just pointing out inconsistency. We're revealing a shadow at work. It's worth considering. And the mind makes quiet adjustments. We're constrained. They're reckless. We're principled. They're corrupt. Our own capacity for harm gets outsourced, and we stay the good ones and the clean ones and the ones who had no choice. And this is the strange relief, if you will, that projection offers us. It lets us act out without feeling like we've betrayed our noble selves, and we move into a team identity, and it becomes a container for the shadow. It's hard, maybe even unbearable, to see ourselves as capable of harm. Most people, honestly, they don't want to think of themselves as unjust or deceptive or dangerous. So groups offer us a way out. We fuse our personal identity with the political team, and something shifts. And we no longer have to carry the full weight of moral responsibility because, the group absorbs it and they redefine it. So what felt wrong alone becomes righteous when you're acting together. And aggression gets rebranded as defense, and deception becomes a strategy, and coercion, well, it's a necessity. And the group will give the shadow a new name, and often it is a noble name. And what we couldn't hold alone, it is a virtuous thing to hold it as part of the collective. And at that point, we begin this moralization as shadow alchemy. And Jung points to that, and he says it can be a sign that the shadow is in charge. So when politics get deeply moralized, something subtle but powerful occurs. And Ambivalence certainly disappears. Complexity absolutely flattens. And doubt is replaced by certainty as well as urgency. And moral language isn't just about right and wrong. It can serve as a psychological purpose and a way to transform disowned impulses into righteous action. And the more convinced we are of our own purity, the less likely we are to pause and to really examine and to wonder what we might not be seeing. And so I say, don't abandon moral clarity. This is a call to notice when moral clarity and certainty, and I would say no, moral certainty, when it begins to harden. Notice when that certainty hardens and ask what might be hiding beneath that. And notice the notion of they started it. That's a huge shadow narrative. Few phrases feel more justifying than saying, well, they started it. It's simple, it's persuasive, and it's emotionally satisfying. And it allows us to preserve a sense of innocence and to externalize our aggression and really justify whatever comes next. And the logic is familiar because, we're simply reacting and they're the ones that are provoking. We're defending and it's them that's attacking. And each side builds a narrative where its own excesses are seen as, reluctant. This is reasonable and it's necessary. And both stories might contain truth. And honestly, that's what makes it hard to untangle. But facts don't always cancel each other out, and they can live side by side and mirroring each other. While each side insists the other is to blame, there's truth in both. And, anyway, in that space, projection really thrives. Another thing I would say to be on the lookout for is intelligence as the ultimate tool for rationalization. Because, Jung himself did not place much faith in intellect alone to resolve the shadow. In fact, he worried that intelligence often made things worse. The more skilled we are with ideas, the more elegant our justifications, can become. Highly educated people, it has been my experience, aren't necessarily more self-aware. They're just more fluent at defending what they already believe. Sophist. We tell ourselves stories, that we're being logical and that we are simply following reason. Oh, we've got those reasons. And the contradictions don't matter because our goals are noble ones. But clarity of thought isn't the same as clarity of seeing. And so I don't want to sound like I'm critiquing intelligence. It's just a reminder that intellect untethered from humility can deepen the very blindness that it hopes to cure. So our collective innocence is a dangerous illusion. And what I mean by that is when the group believes that they are the reasonable ones and the others are the dangerous ones, something has really shifted. The shadow is no longer personal and it's crossed the threshold and become truly us versus them. It's become a collective. And from there, every action can be reframed as prevention, and every escalation is merely defense. So a call for restraint feels naive. No one on your side is aggressive. It's always them. everyone on your side is under siege. This is the psychological terrain where norms really begin to erode. Fear and certainty combined are intense. It's easy to imagine we're protecting the good. It's harder to ask whether we've simply moved, our own darkness like a target onto someone else's back. And we see a move towards restoration of the sacred. That is a territory that I can appreciate. I also understand that resacralization fails miserably without shadow awareness. So whether it's religious, theosophical, whether it's secular, whatever, there's talk of restoring a sacred civic center, which encourages mutual tolerance and shared rituals and constitutional norms. And, these are essential, but they can't hold if the deeper work remains untouched. So our Western pluralism is asking a lot of us. It's asking for mutual restraint, fair application of the rules, very important, acceptance of loss. Imagine that, your side loses. But when a group believes that we alone are virtuous and they alone are corrupt, then fairness feels like surrender. And shared rules are not only untenable, they're unsafe. And the very idea of compromise it's like betrayal. And institutional reforms, well, certainly they can help, but they can't reach what we refuse to see within ourselves. So, I think the hardest integration in the end, if we can just do this, and that's let the enemy keep their humanity, because we know from personal shadow work that shadow integration does not mean approval. It just means recognition. And to see clearly doesn't mean you have to agree, but it does mean that it means to stop pretending that harm lives only in others. So civically, this might look like, granting rights to those who we disagree with, and accepting our own fallibility and allowing space for uncertainty and letting go of this fantasy of moral purity. None of this is easy. It really honestly may be the most painful kind of strength. Well, it certainly takes strength. And most of us would rather be righteous than reflective, and we'd rather be correct or clean than whole. Think about the collective shadow problem. A society doesn't fracture because people hold different views. It fractures when each group becomes convinced that all danger and all deception and all bad faith lives entirely on the other side of the aisle. And from there, politics becomes performance and institutions become weapons. And restraint is a weakness. So, in that point, no one considers themselves extreme. Everyone feels justified. And the more convinced we are of our side's virtue, well, the harder it becomes to see the part that we play in the very dynamics that we fear. Jung wrote that the shadow grows stronger the more it's denied. So, the ability to see ourselves not just as we aspire to be, but as we really are. And that's capable of both harm and healing, and projection and recognition. Because as I see it, the future may not depend so much on defeating the people we fear, but on learning to face the parts of ourselves that we'd rather leave in the dark. Something that I've noticed. Thank you.